Joining me today on Screen and Beyond is a two-time Emmy-nominated writer and producer who has been involved with Mork and Mindy, Police Squad, Duckman, She Spies, and The Muppets Take Manhattan, just to name a few. He currently has a book out called, now get this, Funny, the Book, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Comedy. It's David Misch. David, welcome to On Screen and Beyond.
Thank you very much. But just one thing, I want to tell you that you say Emmy-nominated. I prefer to say Emmy-losing. Let's just get straight to it.
Well, we like to leave those things out, you know. It still must have been a thrill to be nominated for an Emmy.
It was. Well, actually, in a sense, I won, but I didn't. Robin Williams won for Best New Performer, but I was on the staff of Mork and Mindy that year. So we all felt like we got an Emmy. And then the one time I was nominated was for a show called Duckman, which was an adult, very adult animated. In fact, never let your children ever see this. A series with Jason Alexander as the voice.
I have the DVD.
You have it?
Yes, I do.
I wondered who bought that. Thank you. I get 3.5 cents for that. So that was nominated, and it was up against a few other shows, and we were all sitting in the audience. And the whoever the celebrity was, I no longer remember. I blacked out the whole thing. Said, and the winner is, and we all went, we won! But it was Dr. Katz. Dr. Katz won. But it started with a D, so we were already, renegotiating our salaries. And I got one other story about the Emmy thing. So one thing I discovered, and I don't know if this is still the case, but at the time, they had a number of sound awards for best recording, best mixing, best editing. And each of the sound awards nominees, there were like 5, 10, 15 people who were on the crew that did the editing or the mixing or whatever. So there were like 6 of these categories, and there were like 10 or 15 people in each one that won. So the funny thing was, after this humiliating loss, I went to the bathroom, and a bunch of the sound people were in there. And what it turned out to be was that everyone in the bathroom had an Emmy. They were poking each other with their Emmys, trying to get to the urinals. They were pushing their Emmys onto the basins, so they could wash their hands. So everywhere I looked, there were nothing but Emmys. It was just the perfect end of that day.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard stories about Emmys because they're sharp, evidently. And I know I interviewed a writer for Rain Man. And, and he also did, what was his name? Mickey Rooney starred in it, Bill, which he won an Emmy for. And when he got the Emmy, they were taking a picture or something, and he fell off the stand that they were standing on, and he stabbed himself in the leg. Oh, my God, another
Emmy-inflicted tragedy.
Right.
I was writing and directing a syndicated TV show that had a murder in it, and I decided I wanted to murder someone with an award. So I wanted to figure out what the best award was, what the most deadly award was, and I got through to, and I've forgotten his name now, he's so famous, but he is one of the few people who's won an Emmy, a Tony, and an Oscar. And I asked him, and he said without question the Emmy was the deadliest. So that but I couldn't get the rights to it, so I used an Emmy knockoff.
Now, let's talk about your book, Funny the Book. What prompted you to write this book?
Lack of respect. Everyone loves comedy, but they don't really. I mean, if you put up, Death of a Salesman against Some Like It Hot, who's going to win? Mm-hmm. And I think that's just not right. I think the achievements of comedy are just as great. I think the challenges in comedy are just as great. And more important, I think what comedy is and what it means is just as important to life as drama is. And I think comedy is not inescapable, but it's undo-withoutable. I mean, you can live without laughter, but would you want to?
Right.
And in fact, in the book, I talk about how in the 1970s in Uruguay, political prisoners, one of the forms of torture they used, and this is absolutely true, was they would take political prisoners to see a movie, and they would be tortured if they laughed. So they had to avoid laughing in order to avoid being tortured. And it's, think about it. If there's something funny, how do you not laugh? That's a form of torture in itself. So anyway, I thought it would be nice if someone took comedy apart in a way that didn't kill it. I tried to make the book funny in itself, and I tried to take a lighthearted but fairly wide-ranging look at where comedy comes from, what it is, and what it means, along with dealing with some of the famous comedies and comedians.
Mm-hmm. Is it almost like a history of comedy through the years, or?
It includes a history, and it goes back to a mythological figure named Trickster, who is essentially the humanity's first comedian, and then it goes up till yesterday, or actually the day before I, submitted the book for publication.
Yeah.
But, it definitely has a history element in it, but it also deals with the rules of comedy, like the rule of three. Why are things funnier in threes? And the answer has to do with pattern recognition. And it also gets into a neurological, biological element. The chemical dopamine, which I like to say is the funniest chemical in our bodies, is essential to why the humor response is what it is. So as I say, it's sort of embarrassingly wide-ranging in that it covers, the Marx Brothers, Buster Keaton, Steve Martin, as well as the health benefits of comedy and also the health risks of comedy, the people who have died laughing, of whom there have been a few.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they do say that laughter is good for your health, too.
I'm trying to remember the quote. It's something like, I think the most important quote in the book is from God, who said, "Laughter doeth the heart good like a medicine," in the Bible, if you can believe that.
Huh. Now, the cover of the book, you've got the traditional Groucho glasses with the nose and the mustache and the eyebrows. Yeah. Did you decide what you wanted for the cover of the book?
I had a design which was going to be the masks of comedy and tragedy, with them both being comedy. But maybe that was a little too high tone, and Groucho glasses sure tells the tale. I was just at Book Expo America, a big convention in New York City where people hawk their wares. Mm-hmm. And I had been told beforehand that there was lots of free giveaways, that, you just go from booth to booth and get all this great stuff. But it really wasn't. It was like either it was manuscripts or it was tote bags. And finally I ended up getting a tote bag to carry the various tote bags that I had gotten. But what I did is I gave away Groucho glasses. They cost me, I believe, about 35 cents a piece. They were the hit of the convention.
Oh, I'm sure.
People were scrambling and killing each other to get their free Groucho glasses. So that either says something about the iconic power of the Groucho image, or it says something about the cheapness of book publishers in the 21st century.
Now, do you find when you go to a book signing convention that most of the books are by people that are, how can I put this?
Losers?
No. But a little stuffy, I would say.
It depends on the convention. Look, there was a section there for erotic literature, like 50 Shades of Grey kind of stuff. That was not so boring.
Okay. But a lot of books, they're biographies and things like that. So they're not as, they're not filled with laughter, obviously.
No, I mean, I'm hoping that's what distinguishes mine a little bit, because as far as I know, there's never been a funny book written about comedy. And I'm, hoping that even though there's a lot of information in the book, hopefully you're laughing enough so that you don't realize you're getting smarter. I would not want anyone to think that they would get smarter reading my book. However, I want to do it without their realizing.
Right, yeah. Now, of all the actors that have been out there, who do you feel is the funniest actor or comedian?
Well, it's always, first of all, my personal opinion doesn't really matter. And, in fact, there's a great quote by, I am an expert, I think, to some degree, on what comedy is, but I'm not even remotely an expert on what you'll find funny. Mm-hmm. We can only figure out, our own laughter quotient. So Shakespeare said, a jest's prosperity lies at the ear of him that hears it, never in the tongue of him that makes it, meaning that we decide what's funny.
Right. Yeah.
And so I can't say who the greatest comedian is, but I can say who most people in comedy think the greatest comedian is. That's Groucho. Mm-hmm. The man had it all. I mean, he was, an amazing verbal comic, but he was also a damn good physical comic, just in the way he moved. I mean, he could dance. He could move his body in very funny ways when he wanted to, and then he could just stand stock still and reel off one-liners till you couldn't take anymore. And, of course, his basic appearance was ludicrous and funny. with that, grease paint mustache that didn't even attempt to be realistic. It was almost just like a clown mask.
Right, yeah.
But it was very often deadpan. Groucho never mugged, or very seldom did anyway.
Do you enjoy the Marx Brothers themselves? You're watching their films and things?
Oh, my God, yes. Oh, that's what got me into it. It was I went to a double feature in the 1970s when there was a revival of the Marx Brothers. They had pretty much fallen into obscurity after Groucho's TV show, You Bet Your Life, had gone off the air. So no one really knew or cared about them for 10 or 12 years. If anyone did, they were like these washed-up old people. And then there was a revival in the 70s which sort of played off the rebellious 60s generation as they got a little older, and suddenly they discovered this anarchic, to hell with society and its rules comedy team. And Duck Soup and Night at the Opera were playing a double feature in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I was living at the time. And I went to this beautiful new theater, and it was absolutely packed. And it was like the first time I saw A Hard Day's Night in a theater, where the screams were so loud I couldn't hear the movie, and in this, the laughter was so loud you missed half the dialogue. I had to go back the next day to hear it. And that, man, when I heard that, I thought, that is what I want to do with my life. I want to make people make that loud barking noise.
So, did you, at that point, start being you were a stand-up for a while, correct?
I was not the world's most successful stand-up. I had my moments, but I really did not thrive on audience interaction. I really just wanted to present some things that I felt were amusing and have people nod their heads and say, by golly, he's clever. I didn't want that sort of rolling, loud laughter that sort of envelops you with love. I didn't want to have a personal relationship with them, which is just death to a comedian. You've got to have a personal relationship with them. So I sort of gave that up and discovered that writing was much more satisfactory because I could have other people be my intermediaries.
How did you become a writer, story editor? And I sometimes don't understand, like it lists you as a story editor and an executive story editor and a special consultant and executive consultant on your listings here. But what was your first job? Mork and Mindy as a writer?
Yeah, well, let me go backwards and just explain that those consultant titles and everything, they're basically just salary things. They don't mean anything. Basically, there's a showrunner who runs a TV show, and then everyone, and there's sometimes co-showrunners, and then everyone else is beneath them, but the ones who have executive in their title get more money.
Oh, yeah, well, I figured
more
that.
Responsibility. But everyone sort of does the writing more or less together. So my first job was Mork and Mindy. I was a stand-up, and I sent a 7-page sketch to a guy who I had heard about who managed some important people. He managed, he was part of the management firm that managed Woody Allen, David Letterman, Billy Crystal, Robin Williams, who was not known at that time,
right,
and some other people. So it was a really important firm. And this guy read my 7-page sketch and said it was the funniest thing he'd ever read and that he was going to get me a job. And he did. He got me on Mork and Mindy, and I was a little nervous because I consider myself, pretty hip guy, and this was a TV series about some sort of alien. It was like my favorite Martian. I was like, that's lame. Who wants to do that? And my manager said, actually, I managed the guy who's doing it, Robin Williams, and I think you'll realize he's pretty good. So he turned out to be right.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now,
in fact, the first time Robin walked out on the stage, it was so really magical because you could see that the superstar had been born right in front of your eyes. I'm standing there. He walks onto the stage. The audience goes insane. There's literal electricity in the area. You're shivering from the fiber of the air because everyone knows something incredible has just happened, and no one else knows about it. It's only the 300 people in that room that know 2 weeks later he's going to be on TV and everyone's going to go nuts. So that was really a fantastic experience.
Yeah. Now, when you were writing for that, was it difficult to put your mind into, nanu, into that mindset?
And then there's Robin. They're not exactly the same thing. But Robin had such a distinctive personality. It was not only possible but incredible fun to try to replicate his voice. But that's what TV is. You try to replicate the voice of your actors and put your own stuff in the way they would do it, and that's part of the challenge. But Robin was so brilliant. You knew that you could do you could do a lot of things and he could make them better. Now, the story was that Robin improvised the whole show. He did not. We were working till 4 in the morning writing that show.
Right, yeah.
But what he did do is he made everything better. He didn't, and a lot of his improvisations were dirty. I mean, Robin loves being dirty.
Things we'll never see, right?
Yeah. And he offended no one. I literally, and this is not like an exaggeration or symbolic or something, but I literally saw nuns in the audience who would just clutch their stomachs with laughter as he said the dirtiest conceivable thing. He was just so magical, it just didn't matter. But it was just catching that tiger by the tail was just an amazing thing, and you knew that you could write stuff that maybe wasn't that great, and Robin would put either add a word or two, or he would use a funny voice or do something with his body that would just make it hilarious.
Yeah, jeez. When you were a writer for that show, did you have like a character that you were responsible for writing for, or was it just a collaborative thing where you all sat together and threw out some ideas and, somebody said, oh, that's great, and that type of thing?
Well, you usually, it was not so much a character thing, but what you would do is you would write your own script, and then the whole group would get together and tear it apart and put it back together again, and then at the end, you go over it line by line trying to make each line better.
I
so
see.
It's a very, again, this is one of the things, the themes of the book, which is that, and it's a cliche, comedy is a serious business, but everyone who does it does take it seriously and knows that the adjustment of word placement, the word length. I mean, you don't want a 3-syllable word there, you want a 2-syllable word there. The sound of words. There's a chapter on the rules of comedy in the book, and for instance, a K sound is much funnier than like an M sound. You want something that's hard because you want a hard end to that joke so everyone knows it's over and that you're given permission to laugh. And in fact, the this has been measured scientifically, although how I could not say. The funniest animal is a duck, and it's easy to figure out why. It's a 1-syllable word ending with a K, and it sounds like a dirty word.
And that's why the insurance company uses that as their mascot.
Aflac, absolutely.
That's right, yeah. Huh.
And which also ends with a K.
Right, yeah. So now, people don't really think about funny as being a scientific thing, but you guys really have it down to a science.
Well, yes. Ultimately there's mystery in everything, and there's an element of, in fact, one of the themes of the book also is comedy and drama, in my mind, have absolutely no difference between them. You cannot say a principle of drama that doesn't also apply to comedy. Tension and resolution, surprise, they're all elements of every art form. So why is a certain word at the end of that sentence funny rather than sad? It's difficult to break that down, so there's an essential mystery. But you can break almost everything else down, and especially when you've been a comedy writer for a few years, you can write funny. I mean, you as a professional, you can sit down when you're miserable, when your cats just die, whatever's happened, and you can still be funny. And there is an element of sort of, for me, that depressed me a little, to be cranking out the funny. I like to be inspired a little more, and I sort of felt a little corrupted by how facile I became, and I wanted to get. One reason I quit Mork and Mindy after 2 years was I wanted to sort of get back to being more inspired. But that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which I read was attributed to Igor Stravinsky, but have been unable to confirm that because I tried to confirm everything in the book. Which is, someone asked him how much he worked every day, and he said, 8-10 hours. And they said, my God, you're inspired for that much? And he said, no, but I want to be there when inspiration strikes. And that's what being a professional means. I mean, you put in the time, and then you hope something happens, and something usually does because you put in that time.
When you did Police Squad, were you a writer for the show, or did you come up with a concept, or what were you?
No, I was just a writer, and most people don't know, but it's a good thing to discover on DVD or however you view your things. After the movie Airplane came out, which was written and directed by 3 guys from Madison, Wisconsin, named David Zucker, Jerry Zucker, and Jim Abrams, it was a huge hit and also one of the funniest movies ever.
Oh, yeah.
And they wanted to do another movie about cops doing the same thing of this deadpan humor, making fun of the genre that they were doing. And the studios wouldn't buy it, so they said, screw it, we'll make it a TV series. And they did, and I was hired. And Leslie Nielsen, who had played a supporting role in Airplane, was the star of Police Squad. And just like Airplane, everyone, especially Leslie, who had been a a sort of dramatic or occasional romantic comedy leading man for his entire career, for the first time did essentially slapstick comedy, but entirely deadpan, never cracking a smile, never letting the audience know that there was a joke. And that was Police Squad, and it did pretty well, but it didn't make it. And one reason it wasn't renewed, we heard, was an ABC executive said the problem with that show is you have to watch it. A lot of people watch TV while they're doing other things.
Right.
And they glance up at the screen. If you do that, you think it's a straight cop show.
Mm-hmm.
You only by looking what they're doing while they're saying these things, you realize why it's funny.
Yeah, I used to love that show. That was a riot. And like you say, you had to watch it to catch everything, and then even then, you'd miss some things.
Yeah, and one of the things I loved is that while Mork and Mindy, the writers, were terrific, they were pretty conventional TV writers, and, absolute top of their trade. But Zucker, Abrams, Zucker were from a different generation, and they took comedy incredibly seriously. I had a huge fight with one of the other writers about a semicolon in a stage direction. Not my proudest moment. But at least we were both taking it seriously.
Huh. Now, you mentioned Duckman, very popular show. How did you get involved with that? An actor will go out and have to audition, but how does a comedy writer get involved with a show?
You send in a script, you have an agent, and the agent submitted some material, scripts I'd written, and the producers really liked it. And they called me in for what I call the asshole interview, which is, we like your writing. If you're not an asshole, we'll hire you. So I was able to pass that by feigning not being an asshole. And I had a great time. Two of the guys who ran the show, Jeff Reno and Ron Osborne, are two of my very best friends. They also worked on Moonlighting and The West Wing, just absolute top-of-the-line writers. And again, we took things very seriously there, which isn't to say we didn't have lots of fun, too.
Mm-hmm. It would be fun to be a fly on the wall when you got a bunch of writers writing shows like that, or Police Squad, or Mork and Mindy, just to see what goes on. It must be a riot, because you guys, I'm sure you go off the deep end of sometimes.
Oh, very much so. But it would have to be a heavily edited show, because there are times when it's, you cannot breathe from laughing because there's so many funny people saying so many funny things. And then there are other times when you're sitting around waiting for that punchline for hours, and those are not the happy times.
Have you ever had anything where you thought you had the funniest line in the world and everybody just sort of looked at you and said, "What are you thinking?"
No, that's never happened to me. Everything I've done has been successful. It's weird. I understand other people have that experience. Yeah, no, of course. We all run into that. And it's weird. But, at that level, generally speaking, if you say something that doesn't work, it's like, good try. But one of the interesting things, and there's a new book out by a writer I really admire, Jonah Lehrer, who wrote a book called How We Decide, which I ripped off in my section on dopamine and how humor is born inside the neurons of the brain. But he's written a new book called Imagine, which is about creativity. And he talks about how the way to be creative is just to throw things out there. You don't edit yourself. That's how Robin Williams operated. He never censored himself. He said whatever he thought. Mm-hmm. And that's what we would do in these sessions. You throw out ideas. Sometimes they're terrible, but everyone in that room knows. If you throw out 10 ideas and 9 of them are terrible and 1 is brilliant, it was worth it. And therefore you are patient with people who say stupid things as long as they occasionally say a good one.
Well, I know, David, we're running short here, and do you have time for 2 more questions?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll finish up with our final 2 questions, and it takes us away from your writing and producing and everything else in the book. But you personally, what are your favorite TV shows of all time that you like to just sit back and watch?
It's difficult to say all time because you just think of, it's like, which kid you like? It's the most recent one. So I tend to favor the things I'm into at the moment. But, there are classics, all Dick Van Dyke, most comedy writers, why they got into comedy writing. And Carl Reiner was kind enough to say nice things about Funny the Book, so I'm especially bonded with that show now. And then things like Cheers, Taxi, Seinfeld. Right now, before Steve Carell left, and it's still a very good show, but it's not quite what it was, I don't think. The Office is, I think, one of the towering achievements in comedy, because it's the first time that I'm aware of that the drama was almost as important as the comedy. Because they had no laugh track, because they weren't playing to an audience, they could actually act. If you look at those All in the Family shows, Carroll O'Connor was a fine actor, but in there he would say a line and then freeze his face while the audience laughed for 20 seconds.
Right.
I mean, he couldn't do much else. But in The Office, they don't have to wait for laughs. And so Steve Carell did the most brilliant, subtle acting there, where he played a jerk, and yet you felt for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't beg for, he didn't say, I'm vulnerable, but you felt it anyway. It was just great. And then the other show that blows my mind right now is Community. And this is not everyone's favorite, and it is not to everyone's taste. I'm just saying for me.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I love it so much is it's blown the boundaries of sitcom wide open. It's done things with their individual episodes, and I don't think anyone's ever thought of. They have a zombie movie episode.
Right, yes.
They have a 6 different timelines episode, although we actually did something similar to that on Duckman. But anyway, the level of the writing and acting on that, I think, is pretty wonderful.
You mentioned those 2 shows you mentioned. We've had guests from those shows. One of them was Anthony Russo, who's the executive producer or writer for Community.
Oh, really? Wow, that's great.
And also Rosemarie from the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Ah, that's great, too.
Yeah. Now, the other question is movies. What's your favorite movies?
Well, the simple answer is the movie everyone pretty much agrees. It's the Citizen Kane of comedies, which is Some Like It Hot. And it's pretty much a flawless movie. I mean, the brilliant screenplay, every word, brilliant direction, brilliant acting. More recently, I'm a huge fan of Bridesmaids. In certain ways, that's sort of conventional because it was a huge hit movie. But I feel that's the kind of thing that doesn't get enough credit. People think, oh, yeah, they got together a bunch of wacky women and they threw up on each other. But it was a little more than that. And from what I've read of the development, it took 2 years for Kristen Wiig and her writing partner to put that together, working with Judd Apatow. And I think it's a wonderfully constructed script. And again, a lead character, unusual, I think. I mean, a woman who's not conventionally beautiful and who, does make a fool of herself, but in ways that are not like Lucy falling, into a pie or something,
right,
but much subtler emotional things. And speaking of that, I got to say I'm a big fan of Lena Dunham's new HBO series, Girls, which I think has redefined what female comedy is for the 21st century.
Yeah. Now, every one of those movies and TV shows that you mentioned were comedies. You said nothing about sci-fi.
Oh, I didn't know you were asking for other movies.
Oh no, I meant anything.
Oh, any movie. Well, Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is the movie.
Oh, okay. I thought you just your preference was comedy.
Oh no, well, I wouldn't say preference, but it's certainly a big favorite. But oh no, I see lots of others. Look, I love Mean Streets. I still think Mean Streets is Scorsese's best movie, and Citizen Kane, of course, and McCabe and Mrs. Miller. I got lots.
Okay. Well, with a book called Funny the Book, I assumed that you like comedies.
Well, I do. But my standards are a little tougher, I think, for comedy because I've been exposed to a lot.
I'm sure. Yeah. Is it difficult for you to sit and watch a comedy, and do you tend to pick it apart or anything, or?
Hey, to me, there's a real simple answer to that, which is if I'm taking it apart, it's not good. If I have time to think about why that joke works or doesn't work, it isn't sucking me in. Mm-hmm. Something like Bridesmaids, I really wasn't thinking about the construction of that script until afterwards. I definitely thought about it then. Yeah. But during the movie, I was just totally into it.
Yeah. Now, as far as Funny the Book, what would you say is your favorite part of the book? Is there something that's in the book that this is something you really want to let people know about?
Well, there's a chapter on Buster Keaton, who's my idol, and it's everyone thinks about Chaplin, and Keaton gets a little less attention. And I think Keaton is subtler and more modern, and again, in his own way, quite groundbreaking, because he's, as far as I know, the first comedian who acted without acting. He was known as the Great Stoneface, so he gave you nothing. You had to come to him. You had to figure out what he was feeling by the context, not by his, looking sad or looking foolish. And that I just love. I just love the boldness in that choice. Mm-hmm. And also, I guess I like my chapter on on science because I'm so not a science guy, and I had to sort of learn some stuff to do it. So I'm proud of myself for figuring out polysyllabic words like dopamine and neurotransmitter. But I got a hell of a lot of it from Jonah Lehrer and some other sources. But it's fascinating what the process of comedy is in the brain, and I think in figuring that out, you understand a lot more about why humor plays such a role in people's lives. And then the one other thing I'd mention is that the last chapter is actually essentially about the theology of humor, the relationship of humor to religion, not religion, but to spirituality, to the most important elements of our lives. And I think there is a connection. I'll leave you to find out by reading it.
Yeah. Well, David, I want to congratulate you on the book, and I want to make sure everybody goes out and gets Funny, the book, everything you always wanted to know about comedy. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
David Misch, I want to thank him so much for taking the time to talk to us. He's a funny guy, a lot of fun talking with him, and he's got a lot of great stories there. But get his book. You'll get a lot of great other stories that he didn't talk about. And also, I didn't realize that there was so much serious science behind being funny. You just take it for granted. But David's got all the inside scoop on that in his book, Funny, the Book. Everything you always wanted to know about comedy.